I told you last week that I am an addictive person, that I get really addicted to certain things, and that main addiction that I have is to Apple products. So I listed all the different Apple products that I've gone through throughout the years. I talked about iPhone and iPad and MacBook, and then as I got home and as I was reflecting on the sermon, I realized there were a lot of Apple products that I missed that I've had. Do you remember iPods? You remember those? How much everyone wanted those, and then I realized I had completely forgot those even existed. My favorite one right now is the AirPods. So I had to explain this to the 8 o'clock service. They're a little bit less tech savvy, we'll put it that way. But if you see anybody walking along the road or the street, the supermarket with those white things sticking out of their ears, it's not a fungus, it's called AirPods. And that is their way of telling you, I don't want to talk to you. Right? That's the new way of shutting out the world. Just give them their space. They're probably angry and listening to some music, but that's okay. This week, Apple made the news and is going to maybe be releasing a new product here pretty soon that I'm a bit worried about. I told you how I would sell off everything to buy Apple products, but this week, Apple acquired a self-driving car company. And I'm scared. I've started researching. I've seen the Fonzie on daytime TV saying something about reverse mortgages. I'm not sure what that is, but I think I might look into it if Apple releases a car. I'm excited for that car because that's not going to be for me. That's going to be for my wife. Anybody else have a wife that's a bad driver? Don't dare raise your hands. That was a trap. That was a trap. But it's going to be awesome because this is the way of the future. It's a little bit kind of sci-fi, but they're saying this is actually going to happen, that one day, probably sooner than later, we're going to have self-driving cars. We'll be able to sit in the driver's seat, we'll be able to plug in where we're going, and it's going to magically take us there. And that may sound really crazy, but really much of our world and what's the way our culture is moving is towards this automated process. All right, I can pull out my phone right now and look and see who's at my front doorstep because I've got one of those video doorbells attached to my phone. I can, with a poke and a swipe, I can turn on the lights in my bedroom from right here. I'm in the market for one of those smart thermostats. Have you seen this thing that you can walk into the door and it knows when you walk into the door and it knows to turn on the AC to the level that you like it at? It's crazy. We used to think it was so difficult to answer the door, to turn on a light switch, and to bump down the thermostat. And now even those minor inconveniences are done for us. It's awesome. And this self-driving car, the idea is it may get kind of frustrating sometimes, which is really pretty simple, that we press a gas pedal and we turn a steering wheel. But even that is too much effort, and so we're going to automate that for you. Poke it in, get to where you need to go. I tell you that because I wonder how many of us want or do treat faith like that self-driving car. That we say, I want to plug into my destination and I want to sit back and I want to cruise and I want to get there. The purpose of this little 2-week sermon series is, if that is you, to challenge you in that understanding. Last week we talked about locating yourself, about the importance of knowing where you're at on the spiritual journey that we call discipleship. And then this week we're going to talk about destination, knowing where you need to go, and not just where you need to go, but how to get there. And so if last week I talked about the Find My Friends app and the awareness of where we are, if last week was the Find My Friends app, this week is Google Maps. Right? Because even though I'm an Apple guy, I know Google Maps is way better than Apple Maps. Amen? So today we're going to talk about where to get from where we are to where God wants us to be. And to do that, we're going to look at a passage, just a couple of short verses in Luke chapter 17, some context for this for you. So Jesus has just preached to his disciples, his apostles, his followers. And he said he's taught two really kind of difficult lessons. He's taught about sin and temptation, and he's taught about forgiveness. And so he stood up in front of them and he said, look, you're going to be tempted to sin and it's going to be hard. But he said, if you give in to temptation or if you experience temptation, it's going to be better for you to tie a millstone around your neck and go down in the bottom of the sea. And then he talks about forgiveness. And he says, if a brother comes to you, a friend, a family member comes to you and says, I've messed up, please forgive me. Jesus says, don't just forgive him once. Forgive him not 2, not 3, not 4, but 7 times, the number of perfection. Always be perfect in your forgiveness. So Jesus has just said, this is a really high calling for your life. This is where you need to be. And I'm going to do some of that this morning. I'm going to tell you where you need to be. And you may have the same reaction that the apostles had to Jesus in Luke chapter 17. And I'll just read verses 5 and 6. The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." And the Lord said, "If you had faith like the grain of a mustard seed, you could say to that mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and be planted in the sea,' and it would obey you." He says, if you had the faith of a tiny little mustard seed, you could tell to that tree, "Be uprooted and go into the sea." Two things I want us to see in this passage. The first is something that I reminded you of last week. And that's that when we talk about the path of discipleship, when we talk about growing into who Jesus wants us to be and practicing the spiritual disciplines, this is not about salvation. You cannot earn your salvation. No matter all the good works you do, we're going to talk about 9 things to do. If you do all 9 things every day of your life, God's not going to love you anymore. He's not going to save you any more than he already has. Salvation happens at the start of step 1 when you receive his grace and you go from darkness to light. Your eternity is secure. But then within that, there's some growth to happen, and it's for your benefit. When Jesus says, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, this is what he's telling us. It is that you don't have to be a stage 3 Christian to experience the power that Christ offers to us. You don't have to be perfectly sanctified, a good churchy word, for Jesus to work in and through you. It takes even just the little tiniest bit, the faith of a mustard seed. The second thing I want us to look at in this passage is the fact that the disciples, the apostles, say, "Increase our faith." These are the ones who walked with Jesus, who knew him, who saw him perform miracles, and still they say, "I don't have enough faith." And I wonder if that's the cry of your heart this morning. Are you really here because you want your faith to be increased? Or are you here for a lot of other reasons that we come to church? Right? We say, I want to be uplifted by the sermon. I want to hear a song that I like that I've heard on Peace 107. I want to maybe run into an old friend that I haven't seen in a while, and then I want to be out in time to beat the Baptist a cotton patch. If we're not careful, we can shift into that self-driving car, and that's all we do. But we should all want our faith to be increased. Why? Listen, I could talk to you till I'm blue in the face and try to give you a really impassioned pump-up speech about why you should want to walk hand in hand with Jesus, but ultimately that's going to be a Holy Spirit conviction thing. Until you're really convinced in your heart that, yes, I want to grow in grace, me standing up here in a suit and tie is going to do nothing to help you along the way. But I do want to encourage you. Pastor Tommy, full of wisdom as always, led our staff chapel a few weeks ago, and he said something that's really, really stuck with me. He said that the closer you get to Jesus, the simpler things become. The closer you get to Jesus, the simpler things become. And then in our staff gathering, we kind of had a discussion about what this meant. Because if you think about it, on face value, that's just not true. Right? I'm going to give you a lot of things to make your life more complicated this morning. And so how is it that as we're growing into who Christ has called us to be, how does life become simpler? If you're doing more things, if you're taking more time to do spiritual things, how does it become simpler? I think what I learned from that is that your outside stimuli don't change, but your inward heart does. The way you approach the busyness of life radically changes when you know Jesus. It may not be simpler on paper, but it's simpler in your mind and in your heart because you have that inward peace that only he can bring you. C.S. Lewis put it this way. He said, if you aim at heaven, you'll get earth thrown in. But if you aim at earth, you get neither. Aim at heaven and you get earth thrown in. Aim at earth and you get neither. What does that mean? If you delight yourself in the things of the Lord and the things of heaven, all of this will be added unto you. But if you only focus on bettering yourself and what you experience in this life, in this world, you're going to miss what life has to offer. Right? And so when it comes to our faith, it may seem weird to say, increase your faith. It may seem strange to say, go along this faith journey, but we do this with every other thing of the world. We want to increase our salary. We want to climb up the corporate ladder. We want to lower our handicap score. We want to have the best decorated house on Instagram. We do all these things to grow, but I wonder how many of us have actually said, am I growing in my faith? So I want to challenge all of us this morning, no matter what stage you're on, to take a practical step. Remember, at the bottom of your sermon notes, to write something down, either something I say or the Spirit leads you to do, that you can take the next step in your faith. So we'll start by talking about the knowers. So if you remember last week, this first stage, these are what we call baby Christians. These are people I love to be around because they are excited, they are energetic, they are zealous for the Lord. This stage is all about loving Jesus and learning about him and worshiping him and serving him. And it's just that excitement phase. But if you remember last week, if you were here, we also talked about how easy it is to get stuck in this stage. It's easy to get stuck and not to move on in the faith because this is kind of the autopilot faith if we're there too long. So I want to give you 3 ways that if you're in the knowing stage, if you are a knower, how you can move from that stage to the next. And the very first is that if you're a knower, be known. Be known. What do I mean by that? I mean that in the New Testament, there is no individualistic Christianity. This idea of me and Jesus and I'm going to keep my faith private finds no place in the scriptures. Just like if we're just sitting around waiting to die because we have Jesus in our hearts, that's not in the New Testament either. This idea of pray some prayer, have some emotional experience, and then wait till you die is not true Christianity. In the same way that just me and Jesus is not true Christianity. It's easy in a place like this, in a church like this, to skip this step. It's really, really easy in a church our size to remain anonymous. And I know a lot of you desire that, and I want to challenge you in that this morning. It's really easy to walk in the doors, to drop the kid at the nursery, to slip into the second to the back pew, and then go and pick them up after the service and go and only say hi to the greeters and during the awkward greeting time. Christ wants more. He wants you to get around people. This is why we emphasize small groups. This is why we emphasize being a part of a community, of getting around people who know and who are seeking the Lord. If you show me your friends, I'll show you your future. If you show me those 6, 7 people that are closest to you, I have a pretty good idea of what you're like now and what you're going to be like in the future. So think about that. Who's in your circle? Who are those people you spend the most time with? Are they pursuing you and helping you go along your path in your relationship with God, or are they dragging you down? You've got to be known, and we give you opportunities to do that. Now listen, I'm going to tell you something that sounds a little bit hypocritical because I just said that if you grow closer to Jesus, and this is a step in growing closer to Jesus, if you grow closer to him, that things become simpler. But if you've ever been a part of Christian community, a small group, a Sunday school class, a Bible study, if you've ever been a part of one, for even one session, you know it's not that simple. It's messy, it's complicated, because if you get a bunch of sinners in the same room together, they're still sinners. We don't magically turn into great heroes and pillars of faith. It's messy, it's not pretty, because you're still people in a place and you're talking. And so the best way I can use to think about it is to think about a vacation that Alex and I went on at the early parts of this month. So we went to Destin, Florida. My wife and I, our daughter Grayson, my mother, and my sister. There was a lot of estrogen. This is my life forever now. And so we went off to Destin. We had a good time. But when I got back and people would ask me, how was the vacation? I gave them a very simple answer. And if they're a parent, they gave me the knowing nod. They said, how was the vacation? And I said, it was a beach vacation with a 2-year-old. I get you. Right, it was not restful. It was fun, we enjoyed it, but there was no rest at all. Because Grayson was at the beach, and then she was in the pool, and then she was in the beach, and then it was pool, it was nap, pool, beach, back and forth, back and forth. If you know my daughter, she never stops. And so it was kind of nice, though, because Alex and I have different ways of doing a beach vacation. So on the one hand, there's people like me who, spoiler alert, I'm correct. There's people like me who say, if I'm going to a beach, I'm going to get in the sand. I'm going to get in the waves. I'm going to get in the salt water. I'm going to enjoy the sound and the waves and even get sunburned. I'm going to do that. And there's people like my wife who are not at all beach people, but who are pool people. who she says, I don't want to deal with all that. I don't want to go out there. I want to sit by my pool. I want to sip on a drink, and I want to read a book, and I want to enjoy this time. And so there's beach people who are correct, and then there's pool people. I think about small groups a lot like beach people versus pool people. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, if you go to a beach, you know you're going to get dirty. You're going to find sand in your shoes and in your bags months later. It's unpredictable. You never know what the tide's going to be like. You never know if there's going to be a jellyfish or a shark. You never know what you're getting yourself into. And then there's the pool people. It's pretty predictable, right? You know that you're going to go, there's going to be some level of chlorine. There may be kids running around, but you've got a chair to sit in. You know if you get too hot, then you can just go right back up and cool off in the AC a little bit and then come right back down. It's easy, it's predictable, it's simple, but there's pools everywhere. Small groups are like the beach. You're going to go and you're going to experience something that you can't experience anywhere else. Yeah, it may be messy. Yeah, it may be unpredictable. Yeah, it may sting a little bit sometimes, but you can experience the fullness of life in community that God is calling us all into. So listen, I would love for you to join a small group at our church, but you don't have to do that. You can start your own. You can ask a neighbor or a friend, hey, let's get together once a week, once a month, and eat food and enjoy each other's company and talk about spiritual things. It's that simple. If you are a knower, the first step to take is to be known. The second step to take, we're actually going to skip to number 3 really quick, and then we'll come back to number 2. The third step is to read. It's to read. Now, this may seem really simple, but it's not. Because we only have so many hours of our waking day. I'll be reading through the book of Proverbs. It's all about wisdom and the acquisition of godly wisdom. And that's something that I want, and I think that's something that we all want. But really, if we wait and sit and wait for wisdom to come to us, we're in trouble. Because we can only have so many human interactions in a day, and we can only come across so many wise people. But when we open up the pages of a book, we can glean and gain wisdom. And so you may be saying, I hear this all the time, I'm not a reader. I gave that up in high school. I don't like it. I can't do it. That was a really good excuse 20 years ago. But now there's things called audiobooks. There's things called podcasts. There's ways for you to get into your mind the truths of God that have been revealed through faithful Christian people. To gain wisdom, to gain understanding, to gain knowledge, but you've got to take the time to do it. Start a Bible reading plan. Read the classics of the faith. Read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Read Simply Christian by N.T. Wright. Augustine's Confessions. Read Love Does by Bob Goff, a very modern one that was a New York Times bestseller. Just read something. If you want to lead, you've got to start by reading. You've got to start by getting and taking intentional time to grow. It's simple. Turn off the TV. Put down the Facebook machine and open a page. The second step, skipping back up there, is really a subset of the first. And I wanted to end with this one because it's so important. And that's to get a mentor. Get a mentor. Part of the blessings of having a really intergenerational church like we have is that there's people of all different ages. And so that means that we can be in ministry and do life together. Mentorship for me has been an absolute game changer. When I was brought on staff here a couple of years ago, I sat down Jerry for coffee and I said, Jerry, if I come on staff here, you're gonna work for it. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, I need your wisdom. I'm young, I'm green, I don't know what I'm doing. I need you to come alongside me and intentionally disciple and mentor me. And so we meet for an hour each week. We talk about church stuff. We talk about preaching. We talk about how to be a good husband and a faithful father. We do all of this in a context of a mentoring relationship where he's pouring into me. If you're a knower, you need a mentor. And the beauty is that in this community, there's a mentor for you. And all it takes is asking. All it takes is seeing someone that you just know they have faith and saying, hey, can we grab coffee once a month? Hey, I see how you've loved your children well, and I see how they've been raised up in the church. I want that for me. Can you help me? Can you teach me? Can we do life together? God will bless you abundantly through those mentoring relationships. So that's what to do if you're a knower. And maybe if you're a knower here, you know I need to read, and you can write that down. Or I know I need to get a mentor, and you can write that down. But as we talked about last week, this second stage is about growing. You've gained some knowledge, you've gained some wisdom, you've gained some understanding, so you enter into that second stage that I call growing. What do you do if you're a grower? I told you last week that I most closely identify with this stage. I feel like I'm in that growth stage, that young adulthood in the biblical author's language, and I would guess that a lot of us are here as well. So what to do if you're a grower, if you've gained some wisdom, but you want to keep on the path. The first one there in your notes is to not just follow. Don't just follow, but lead. Don't just follow, but lead. We have a lot of faithful followers in this church, and I praise God for it. But we need more leaders who are going to say, I'm done consuming and I'm going to start creating. Virtually every ministry that we have at this church did not come from the top down. It didn't come from us. It came from one of you who said, I see this need in our community. I see this need in our church. I see this way that I can use my gifts and start something new, and we see the fruit of it. And so listen, just a warning. If you come up to me, and people have done this before, and I'll do it again. Cole McQueen did this not too long ago, and he said, why don't we have a ministry that does this? I will reply to you, great, when can you start? We need folks who are willing to take on leadership roles to meet the needs that they see. We can't do it all. And so whether that's leading a small group, whether that's leading a Bible study or a Sunday school class, maybe that's leading in our youth ministry or in our missions ministry or in our men's ministry or in our women's ministry, find a spot where you don't just consume, but you create. Because the more that we teach, the more that we learn, the more that we teach and show and lead, the more that we learn. Don't just follow, lead. The second thing is to do this. If you're a grower, learn how you can serve consistently. Serve consistently. We're a church with a mission heartbeat. We've got all kinds of opportunities to serve. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And here at the end of the service, we're going to tell you about an opportunity for all of us to serve on one day, and that's going to be great, but I hope that stirs up in you something to say, I need to do this more. So how can you serve consistently? Serve on the ushers team, on the greeting team. Serve once a month and teach children's Sunday school. Men, we need you. Serve in your small groups. Sign up with Steve Godby to be on his hands team. Find a way that weekly or monthly you can serve, because as you serve, you get a servant's heart. You're going to see people not just as people and not just as needs, but as people made in the image of God, that he has sent you to help them. You develop relationships with people so that you're not just giving them their physical needs, you're giving them emotional and spiritual support as well. God begins to bless us when week in, week out, day in, day out, we serve him faithfully. The third thing is this, and this is uncomfortable. You're going to get uncomfortable. Number 3 is to tithe generously. Tithe generously. We have a lot of growers in our church who are very faithful, who may be leading, who may be mentoring, who may have wonderful ministries that they are over, and yet they miss this step. Now, anytime I talk about money, I like to remind you that God does not need your money. The church, we like your money and we need to keep doing the ministries, but Jerry did not tell me, hey, Daniel, I'm out of town, talk about tithing. I talk about tithing because God isn't waiting for you to put an extra zero on that check so that he can save somebody or work miraculous powers. God doesn't need your money. Tithing is not for God, it's for us. Tithing is not about what God needs from us, it's about what we need from God. There's a passage in Proverbs 11 that says this: one who gives freely grows all the richer. Another withholds what he should give and only suffers want. Whoever brings blessing will be enriched, and the one who waters himself will be watered. What does that mean? I wish I could tell you that if you dropped $100 in the plate this morning, that when you get home, there will be an envelope on your front doorstep with $200. Is that going to happen? Probably not. If it is, call me. We'll go grab dinner. But when the scriptures talk about living generously and the way God blesses us in and through that, it's not about getting a return on our investment monetarily. When we give, when we tithe, it's all about giving us a generous and a servant's heart like Christ has. For Alex and I, tithing has been a game changer for us. Since moving back here and having a child and being a pastor and a part-time children's assistant, we're not raking in the cash. We're just not, but we've made an intentional focus to say, no matter what we make, we're going to tithe. And so we write that. That's our very first check out of the chunk in every month. And we give that, and we've learned to give that joyfully even when it's hard. Because sometimes my mind goes to some places of saying, wow, what kind of car could we get for that kind of money? I could be a member at a country club. I could play so much golf with that kind of money. We could put it away and we could grow it for retirement, but then I have to remind myself, that's not my money to begin with. It's just not. It's God's money. So I'm going to give it to him, and I'm going to give it generously to have that generous heart. And I'll tell you, there's been months where we get down to the last week or so and we're worried, is it all going to come together, or all the ends going to meet? And time after time after time, without fail, God has been faithful. It's a miracle that when we're generous to him, he is faithful to us, and we can see his faithfulness in powerful ways. So if you're a grower here this morning and you're not tithing, you're not regularly giving, I'm going to encourage you to go home, talk to your family, talk to your spouse, begin to ask the question, what would it look like for us to live generously? The people in the last stage I called sowers or showers. And these are people who have known the generosity of God for many, many decades. These are the sages, the gray hairs, the balding folks in our church who have walked the faith journey longer than I've been alive. And we talked about how this is what we should all aspire to be disciples who make disciples. That's where we want to go, but it's going to take a long time to get there. But even when we get there, there's still growing to be done. The first thing, if you're a sower, is to put your money where your mouth is and sow. Make disciples. Disciple someone. So in the time of the Bible, Jesus would have been raised up in a culture that the son would take on the job, the career of the father. And so we know from the scriptures that Jesus' dad, Joseph, was a carpenter. And so from a very young age, Jesus would have come alongside his father, Joseph, and learned the family trade. He would have worked with him, apprenticed with him, learned how to use the wood and the nails and how to fashion things together. And so I can't help but think when Jesus starts his ministry at age 30, when he talks about discipleship, he's got that image of his father in the back of his mind. Saying, he brought me alongside him. He taught me. He maybe didn't do anything incredible and was trying to find object lessons in the wood. He just showed him how to live a life. And when we talk about discipleship, it can sound really scary, but really it's just inviting someone else into your life. We got a great example of this when we did confirmation a few months ago, and our confirmation mentors were matched up with confirmands, and they just did life together. They would go get breakfast, they would hang out, they would talk about the big questions of the faith. And what a beautiful picture of what disciple making should be. Because we talked about intergenerational and how we have different ages here. If you're an older person, you should be pouring into a younger person. Because our younger people, our younger generations are being discipled. Everywhere we go, we're discipled. My fear for my own daughters, though, is that they're going to get discipled not by older women and faithful women in our church, but my fear is that they're going to get discipled by Hollywood, who makes terrible disciples. I don't want my daughters to think of the ideal woman as the Bachelorette. I want them to be able to look over in a pew and say, that person cares about me, that person loves me, and that person has brought me alongside of them in their journey of faith. If you're sowing, find someone to disciple. The second thing there in your notes for if you're a sower is to try new things. Try new things. And this really goes for all of us as well. If your faith looks the exact same as it did 10 years ago, you're doing it wrong. If you come in the same door, park in the same spot, sit in the same pew, go to the same Sunday school class, pray in the same way, read the same devotional Bible every morning, you're not experiencing the fullness of life that Christ has to offer. And I know new things are scary, but try it. Try a new way of praying. Try a new spiritual discipline. Try to fast. Try new ways of worship. Selfish pitch here for Lakeway. Lakeway is our Thursday night worshiping community. And it's growing, and God is blessing it. And part of the reason he's growing and blessing it is because we've had more and more people who come into the doors on Thursday nights, and we hear this all the time. They say, wow, I thought it was just going to be young people. And it's not. It's a lot of sowers and showers and sages of the faith who have come and said, I may not like this style of worship, I may not prefer it, but I'm going to try something new. And then in being in that smaller community, they've been blessed and we've been blessed by them. If you're a sower, try something new. Try something different. Read a different book. Pray in a different way. Just do something different and see how God might bless it. And the last thing is this, and this is something not just for sowers to be thinking about, but for all of us in the faith to be thinking about, and that's to leave a faith legacy. Leave a faith legacy. The prayer I have for my life is that long after I'm down 6 feet in a grave, that someone will look back and say, I have the faith I do because Daniel walked alongside me. You should want that as well. Whether it's your children, physically or spiritually, you should have the impact on someone's faith so that when you're long gone, they still remember you and they remember the impact that you had. There's all kinds of ways to make a faith legacy. Maybe it's a ministry that you start that lives beyond you. Here in a few months, you're going to have a really tangible way of doing something very big and making a faith legacy as we start our capital campaign. A way of saying, yes, I want to invest in the future of this church and in the future generations. It can be really big stuff like that, or it can be something really small. When I think of Christ United Methodist Church's faith legacy, I think of one name, and that's Eddie Braswell. A lot of you knew and loved Eddie well. If you didn't know Eddie, you'll know a lot of things that he did. We have Tootsie Rolls and peppermints out every Sunday there in the narthex. We don't just do that to give you a nice snack to keep you awake for worship. We do that because that's what Eddie did. Eddie had a little pocketbook of names. And every time he met somebody new, he'd give them, if it was a lady, he would give them a Tootsie Roll and he'd write down her name. If it was a man, he'd write down the name as well. And he just did something simple. He remembered your name. He put a smile on your face. He hugged you. He shook your hand. And then he took his love of fishing and his other love of loving people and started a fish fry. We do it every year in his memory and in his honor. Eddie had an incredible way of doing really, really simple things for the glory of God that are still paying dividends today. That's the kind of faith legacy I want to leave, and that's the kind of faith legacy that you should want to leave as well. So listen, I don't know what your next step is. I can't tell you. I wish that I could know all of your hearts, and I wish that I could know each individual struggle that you're dealing with. I don't, but God does. And so again, before you leave today, I want you to write something down, something that you can take from this place to grow in your faith. Because Jesus is calling you on a journey. He's not calling you to be stagnant. He's not calling you into a self-driving car. He's saying, come follow after me. And if our response is, Lord, increase my faith, then we've got to take the first step. And then the next step. And the next. God, I thank you for your